Well, hello everyone, and I'm really excited that you are joining me for this updated version of my Homeschooling 101 workshop. Let me go ahead and share my screen so we can get right into it. And pardon me too if I sneeze. Is it working? Gonna work for us? There we go. It's fall and there's allergens in the air. So this is Homeschooling 101. And whether you are considering homeschooling or you've been homeschooling for 1 or 2 years, this is the perfect workshop for you. And I really would like to share with you the benefits and disadvantages both of homeschooling so you can decide if it's the right choice for you. I want to talk about the 5 major styles of homeschooling. So you know about those, as well as the 5 main styles of learning. And I want to give you just some ways to think outside the box and really embrace the homeschool lifestyle. I'm going to be talking a mile a minute because we've got a lot to cover, but let's dive in. So if you don't know me, I'm Amy Furman, and I've got 4 kids. They're currently 25, 23, 19, and 14. Obviously, that's a little bit outdated picture, but 2 of them are grown. One's in college and one is in high school this year. He decided to go to a charter school this year it was a charter school where you can get an associate's degree. They do college in high school. And so he decided to do that. So I'm officially done with homeschooling now, but I homeschooled for 22 years. I am an author, a speaker, and an educational consultant, and I run a ministry to moms called Smudge Pages. And that really is centered around Christian mindset and identity coaching. I want to see women set free from the lies of the enemy that he uses to impact our identity. So that's me, that's my family. But let's talk about why you might want to homeschool. Well, you may already know some of the benefits or have some of them in mind, but I would like to talk to you about them to really increase your confidence in making this decision because the benefits of homeschooling abound. There are so many. So, benefit number 1 is safety. And there's definitely been a more increased concern over safety. It's been growing over the last, say, 20 years, but especially with the pandemic, there was that increase in interest in that, right? Because we can provide our children physical safety when they're at home with us. And this could include health, like against sickness. My goodness, let me stop that. So schools and daycares are germ factories, right? But my kids were rarely sick because they were home with me and not exposed to those germs. Or you may have a child who's got a particularly compromised immune system or life-threatening allergies, and being in that environment might be very dangerous to them. So keeping them home, you can give them health safety, physical safety there. There's also safety from physical harm. So this includes things like shootings. Unfortunately, there have been many shootings over the last several years, and it's heartbreaking. But home is safer for that. It's also safer from bullying because there's a lot of physical harm that happens in schools because of bullying. And as long as we're talking about bullying, let's also talk about the mental and emotional benefits of homeschooling. This is an alarming statistic and very sad to me, but suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death among young people. And statistics indicate that those who are bullied are far more likely to consider suicide. But at home, there's no bullies, hopefully. Or if there's bullying happening, we can just nip that in the bud, right? So this is really a beautiful gift that we can give our kids, this feeling of safety that I'm okay. I don't have to worry, right? Research also shows that homeschoolers have higher self-esteem and self-confidence compared to their public school or just school-educated peers. In my experience, they are far less likely to cave to peer pressure as well. And that's also an incredible gift. I know that we all want kids who are confident and strong and able to stand against whatever the world throws at them. Benefit number 2 is flexibility. So We definitely have flexibility with homeschooling. And just look at this lineup. We have flexibility in curriculum, in schedule, and something that I didn't expect when we started, but that is vacations. So let's talk about curriculum, because this is one of the biggest benefits of homeschooling. You get to decide, you get to choose the curriculum, and there's so much out there. There is traditional, online, hands-on. You can spend a lot or a little. There's really something for everyone. And the greatest benefit is that you get to tailor it to your child's needs. So if you've got a child who's got learning disadvantages, or maybe they're on the other side and they're gifted, or they just need to learn in a non-traditional way, homeschooling can accommodate all of that. You're also able to reflect your family's values and priorities in your homeschooling. So absolutely, you can incorporate your faith. If you're politically minded, you can focus on that, and you'll have time to lobby or serve on a campaign. And maybe you're particularly socially or ecologically minded, and so you can tailor your homeschooling around that and have time to volunteer, which gets us to our next benefit, and that's the schedule. And that you get to set the schedule as well. So you can pick the times of day that you want to school, but you can also pick the weeks and months of the year. We've known people who homeschooled year round. Many people homeschool like we did, which was following the more traditional school calendar. But I've known people to do other things as well. Schedule or homeschool like 4 days a week and take one off, or schedule 3 weeks out of the month and take one off, or schedule 2 months on, one off, whatever. There's so many options. One benefit is that you can tailor it around your work schedule. So if you need to work part-time, and that is definitely something that many homeschoolers do, and it is a possibility, and we'll talk more about that later, but you can do it, and you can tailor homeschooling around your work schedule. So I knew a woman who worked from home. She got up very early in the morning, was able to start work around 4:30 or 5, be done with her work by the time the kids were ready to homeschool, and then she was available for them. You might have early birds in your house. You get up and homeschool early, or maybe you're like our family and no one was really getting going until like about 10, and so that's okay. You can just tailor your homeschooling to that rhythm. You can schedule it around baby schedules, maybe napping. That's a great time, by the way, to get some concentrated homeschooling in. Or maybe dad travels for his work, and so you can school it around that. You can school while he's gone and be off when he's home. The options are just endless. You can also accommodate special needs or requirements. So maybe you've got some significant health issues in your family, and there's frequent doctor's appointments. Well, you can school around that without missing school, right, for those doctor's appointments. You can, maybe one of your kids gets an internship, and so you can tailor their schooling around that. There's so many options. And then, like I said, vacations, we did not expect this, but it turned out to be so much fun because you get to take time off when it's convenient for you to go on vacation. Nobody's dictating, oh, now's spring break or now's winter break or whatever. And you can go on your vacations in the off season, which means usually that it's far less crowded and oftentimes less expensive as well. So we went to Yellowstone more than once, actually. And we're in Yellowstone. If you go in the summer, I am not kidding you. It is sardine people. Like, you can barely move in Yellowstone in the summer, but you go in the off season and it is so delightful. You have the run of the park to yourself. And we went to Disneyland in the off season. Once again, cheaper, and also we could just stand in line for a couple of minutes instead of a couple of hours to get on a ride. And if we like the ride, we could just run around and do it again, right? So those are some things. I'm wondering what you would, where you would go if you knew that you could go on vacation. It would be less crowded and less expensive. Let's talk about benefit number 3, and that is academics. Because if you homeschooled for no other reason, this is really a fabulous reason to homeschool. Test scores indicate that homeschooling gives your child the best advantage academically, the best advantage, not just a advantage, but the best advantage. And interestingly enough, homeschoolers consistently score 15 to 30% above the national average. Homeschoolers also seem to have a higher interest in learning and better retention. So I know that that's not happening in the public school, right? If it was this way when I was a kid, and it's still this way. You cram for the test and then you forget it. But the homeschooling method of learning really increases the enjoyment and therefore the retention. So let me give you, for example, we use the Living Book or Charlotte Mason approach. We'll talk about that in our home, reading really rich, great books as the core of our curriculum. And my daughter studied history this way. In 6th or 7th grade, she studied ancient world history. Fast forward several years, she wanted to in college take the CLEP to get credit for the Western Civ 1 class. And so she took the CLEP, which is a test where you can demonstrate that you already have mastered the content of a particular class, and they will give you credit for it as if you had taken the class. She took that CLEP years after having studied ancient world history with very little refresh studying, went in, aced the test, and was able to get credit for that class, no problem. And it was really because she had retained that information. It was interesting to her when she learned it, and she retained it. Homeschoolers refuse to be pigeonholed. And so, for example, you may ask a homeschooler, what grade are you in? And they'll say, well, I'm 4th grade for this, but I'm 7th grade for that. And, they don't want to be confined to one grade. Homeschooling allows your child to excel where they can. They can just go as fast as they want. Nobody's holding them back. And it also allows them extra time to catch up if they need it. I had a daughter who had significant learning disadvantages. She could barely read when she was in 4th grade. But we just plugged away and a little bit at a time and a little bit at a time. And by the time she hit 10th grade, she was diving into community college classes. So that'll show you like that just some kids need to learn at a different pace, right? Another thing is that outliers thrive in this environment. So you might have a right brain learner, someone who learns a little bit non-traditionally. You might have a struggling learner. Maybe they struggle with dyslexia or ADD or whatever. Maybe you've got gifted or 2E kiddo. All of these can be accommodated by homeschooling. And instead of being a problem area, it actually becomes an advantage for you. Benefit number 4 is the social aspect of homeschooling. So many people say, well, what about socialization? And it's a less common objection now than it used to be because homeschooling has a pretty proven track record, but you don't have to worry even if someone does challenge you on this. In my opinion, this is actually a benefit of homeschooling, this social. And here's why. Actually, let me backtrack. What do we mean by socialization? Well, if by socialization we mean my kid will know how to behave in public, they won't be awkward in social settings, or my kid will have friends, right? Well, you do not have to worry. Your child is going to have plenty of friends. There will be plenty of opportunity for them to be peer socialized. Homeschoolers I know are very involved. They're involved in sports and scouting and church groups and co-op support groups, and they have plenty of opportunities to be peer socialized. They also develop so many skills because of this, and so that will they have enough skills? Of course they're going to have enough skills, as many as you expose them to and assist them in gaining. And then that objection that, well, maybe they're going to be shy or awkward around other people. Okay, yes, there are some homeschoolers who are shy and a little bit awkward around other people, but you're going to find that in the public school as well. Some kids are just more shy than others. Some families are just more less inclined to interact with other people. They kind of stay to themselves more. That is true whether you are homeschooling or you're not. And so I feel like this is more of a personality issue rather than a lifestyle choice. And something that I love, remember how I said that homeschoolers refuse to be pigeonholed? Well, they also refuse to be pigeonholed in their interactions as well. Homeschoolers are at ease with adults and the elderly, the young, you name it. They're not limited to that peer-only interaction. I really believe that homeschoolers are better socialized. Another advantage is that the character qualities can be focused on. Homeschoolers are known for being honest, for being hardworking, for being respectful, all the things that you want your kids to be. And why? Well, it's because we have time to focus on those, right? And create in a learning environment and opportunities that foster the development of those things. Now, lest we think that homeschoolers are perfect, I just want to say, in fact, I often tell people homeschooling brings out the worst in everyone. Anytime you're with somebody 24/7, it creates a lot of opportunity for iron to sharpen iron. But remember, that's okay. It's creating the opportunity to work on it, and you have the time to work on it. So you can stop the lesson and work on that teasing issue, or you can not do school that day and really focus on a laziness issue, whatever it is. You can focus on the thing that's more important at the moment, and the the academics will be there when you get back, right? Another benefit that many homeschoolers sort of praise in this area of socialization is family relationships, and many homeschool families tout a close family relationship. Now, parents often, when you're homeschooling, parents become mentors and siblings become friends. Now, is it a guarantee? No, it isn't. And can it happen without homeschooling? Yes, it can. But I believe that it just is, I've seen it happen frequently, right? I've seen this happen many times where you end up with just a really close-knit family. Maybe not when they're really young, but as they grow older, you do. Now, let me also say, though, again, that sibling rivalry is still alive and well in homeschooling families. It was in mine. There's still friction between parents and kids. There are still struggling marriages within homeschool families. So homeschooling is not a magic formula. And too many people make an idol out of homeschooling. They're trusting homeschooling to generate the results rather than God. I like to tell people that homeschooling is a plan, or it's a tool to help you accomplish your goals, right? A plan helps us clarify. We've got a vision in mind, and a plan helps us clarify how we're going to get there. And a tool helps us achieve that goal. So if I'm building a house, I'm going to have a blueprint. That's the plan. And I'm going to use tools. Now, I could use a hammer and a saw, just really old-fashioned tools to build my home. I could still accomplish it with these old-fashioned tools, or I could use power tools. Now, most of us are going to want the power tools. And I really believe when it comes to kids and there are other tools out there, but homeschooling gives you the power tools to achieve some of these benefits. So let's talk about why you might not want to homeschool, because it's not for everybody. And I want to pause here and say, sometimes homeschooling doesn't work, and that is okay. And that does not make you a bad parent. It does not make you a bad Christian. I personally lived with this lie for years, and it nearly ruined us. So I am very passionate about seeing homeschoolers set free from this lie, and I am passionate about seeing homeschoolers thrive and get started. But I don't want you to believe that homeschooling is the only way to raise godly kids. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. I fully believe in homeschooling. I fully believe in parental involvement. But remember that homeschooling is just a tool. It's not a savior. To save your kids or your family, that right belongs to Jesus Christ alone. Okay, so let's get into the disadvantages of homeschooling. Um, Homeschooling takes time. There's just no other way around it. You can't expect to say, well, here's your school, have at it, and expect those benefits that we talked about. And yes, you gain flexibility in your schedule and your curriculum, but you're going to give up some of your flexibility as the parent. You're going to give up some of your me time. You won't have time, for example, maybe to go work out at the gym or join the ladies' Bible study at church or go grab coffee with all the girlfriends, right? And let me pause here and just say a note to dads if you're watching this, because usually the moms are the ones doing the homeschooling. Please give your wife time off, maybe just a little time every day to unwind. Definitely, hopefully every week, definitely every month. She needs time off because she is not only your wife and the mother of your children and the homemaker in your home, but she's also now doing the job of a teacher. And that's like multiple full-time jobs there. And she will burn out if you don't give her time off. So definitely give her time off. But mamas, you can't expect to have the same life that your non-working public school mamas do. Okay, you're gonna give up some of your me time. Now, I still think the benefits are gonna outweigh that what you're sacrificing. Homeschool is also harder to do when you work. It can be done, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute. But because homeschooling takes time and work takes time, there is that trickiness. Homeschooling costs money, and public school is free. Although, let's be honest, I'm not sure that it's actually free. There's supplies that would have to be bought, and there are fees that have to be paid, and other costs involved. So I don't think it's free, but maybe homeschooling costs a little more. Let's look at the statistics. The average family, the average cost for homeschooling is somewhere between $700 and $1,400 per student per year. Now, don't freak out, okay? It can be done for less, and we'll talk about that in a second. But that's the average, okay? But let's compare that to what the public school spends. The public school is spending on average $14,000 or more per student per year. We are spending 1/10, okay, of that. And that is a 90% savings, people. So who thinks homeschoolers should be in charge of the district budget, right? Still, $700 to $1,400 can be a lot. And if you multiply that by, more than one kid, that definitely can feel constraining, especially when a lot of homeschoolers live on one income. So I do want to say this. In my opinion, you can spend that total, that $700 to $1,400 for the year for the whole family. And we did this. So let me give you some ways to do that. You can buy used curriculum. You can, well, and I will say this, as you reuse curriculum, right, as kids progress and then you reuse it for youngers, that's a great saving. So you might have more upfront cost and then it decreases as you go, but you can definitely buy used curriculum. You can utilize your public library. You can utilize free online resources and homeschooling materials. And some styles lend itself more to this. So when we talk about the styles of learning, if that's a concern, definitely take that into consideration. Another disadvantage of homeschooling is that it requires involvement. It just does. If you're going to homeschool, you have to do the job. So this might be the hardest of all, because believe you me, there were plenty of days that I didn't feel like homeschooling. I didn't want to homeschooling, and the kids were always happy to be like, "Oh, it's okay, Mom. We don't have to homeschool today," right? So it requires some self-discipline. It requires some organization. It requires some planning ahead. It just does. And so those are things that you are going to have to do. Now, lest you think, I don't know if I can do that, then I'm not very self-disciplined. I'm whatever. I frequently meet people who say, "Oh, you homeschool? Oh, that's so great. I wish I could homeschool, but XYZ. I'm not patient enough. I'm not organized enough. I'm not self-disciplined enough, whatever." And I want to laugh at them because I'm not those things. And most homeschoolers that I know are not those things either. We are just ordinary people doing a little bit extraordinary job by the grace of God. I talked about that already. Okay, so let's talk about some other problem areas. So what about these issues? Well, what about if I have to work full time? Now, working part time, we can kind of maybe tweak the schedule about. But what if I have to work part time? Well, can you work from home? Because if COVID did anything, it paved the way for this. You might have the option to work from home, or at least part time work from home. Talk to your employer about that option. Can you job share or flex your schedule? So could you and your husband job share, or a friend who's also homeschooling? Could you, would your boss let you do homeschooling at a different time? Or maybe you just flex your schedule for yourself. So here's two families that I know. One, was a couple who did that. They like sort of worked their job schedule out where they could both do some work and they could both do some homeschooling. And so they sort of alternated, not necessarily every other, but they had different days of the week that they were working, and so that they could both participate in both of the activities. I knew another gal who owned her own business, her own bakery. She was working full-time hours, okay? Because anyone who's an entrepreneur knows that it's a lot of work. And if you have an actual business that's just maybe not kind of online, that's something altogether different. She was a full-time mom and she owned a bakery, but she would get up. Their family were early birds, so they would get up really early in the morning, like 5 in the morning. They would start homeschooling by 6. They would school until about 10. She would have her bakers come in at 10, and they would bake all the cakes that she makes, and other goods for several hours while her kids played and did other activities. Then she, after the workers went home, they might do a little more homeschooling in the evening, or dad would do some with the kiddos. And then late at night, either she or her husband, not late at night, but in the evening after dinner and a little bit of family time, they would then make the deliveries to the grocery stores that that she served. So she was baking cakes she bakes cakes for grocery stores. And that's how she made it work. So just try and think outside the box with your schedule and your options there. Now, what if we're dealing with physical or mental illness or disability? This is really, really tricky. And I am not a professional, so I definitely want you to consult your physician or your therapist or your counselor. But I also want to let you know that I understand. I have lived with chronic health issues for many, many years. And there were days, there were months, there were even years that were much harder for me. And I had to adjust my schedule and even how much we tackled. This was hard, and sometimes it was disheartening. But you just do what you can. And I do want to say this, if the only thing that you focus on in homeschooling, the only thing you can get done is math and reading and discussing really great books, your kids will still get a really good education. Now, what if it is mental health issues, mental illness, or a disability? Well, we didn't deal with a disability, but we did deal with mental health issues in our home as well. I did. I dealt with depression and even suicidal thoughts for a while. And I had a child who dealt with, had some mental illness as well. In fact, there were a couple of years where we didn't do a whole lot of traditional homeschooling because of these issues with my kid, my one of my children. And that was okay because we were taking care of other more important issues. We were caring for this child as a whole person, and not just you're just a student, right? We were caring for them as a whole person. Really, my ministry was born out of this. And I would love to help you, Mama. So if you are feeling overwhelmed, if you are feeling stressed, if you are feeling inadequate, if you're feeling like, I can't do this, or nobody understands, I want you to come check out my ministry at smudgepages.net. I want to care for you. I understand, and I want to help you through. Now, what if I have a child who has one or more learning challenges? Well, I've dealt with this too. I had a kiddo who was pretty she was the self-starter for typical firstborn. Then my second daughter, the one you see here, had significant learning challenges. Significant. She was the one who barely could decode, barely could read in fourth grade. And there were other things at play as well. And then I had a child who had ADD and dyslexia, and then I even had one who was gifted. So I've had the gamut. But homeschooling may actually be better if your child has a learning struggles or disadvantages. And we talked about this previously, but the reason why, the reason why is that you can tailor it around their needs, right? And then there's this next thing that popped up, which is that you might still qualify for public assistance even though you're homeschooling. So my daughter there, Amanda, she didn't speak like hardly at all until she was 3, and then nobody could understand her for several more years. Because we are taxpayers, she qualified for free speech therapy through the school district, even though we were homeschoolers. So check that out and see if that's an option for you. Now, what if my child is a particularly resistant learner? Goodness sakes, I had this as well. So this one can take time, especially if you're bringing them home from a public school setting. And it may take some wooing of them. So to overcome that, I hate school mentality, right? It's going to take time for them to trust you. It's going to take time for you to change that mindset. So I would say, don't focus so much on like jumping right in or really forcing the issue with them. Now, there could be all kinds of reasons why they're resisting you. They may have undiagnosed issues, learning issues, or just even eyesight or something. They may be a right brain learner. They learn in non-traditional ways. They have a non-traditional learning style. They may have some unresolved emotional issues. And all of these may take time to figure out. It may take time to figure out what's going on and how you can even help. It's going to take time for them to know that you're a safe person and home is a safe place. So just be patient, be gracious and gentle, be caring and understanding. And I would encourage you, if this is an issue, to consider delight-directed learning or unschooling. This is one of the ways you can tease out or woo them, is with doing this method. We'll talk about it more later. You might also want to consider a one-on-one consultation. I do offer educational consultations for people to help them figure things out. So because I've sort of hinted at this, let's dive into the styles of homeschooling because there really is something for everyone. So here are some homeschooling favorites. The first one is the classical approach. This has been popular for many years now. And they follow what's called the trivium. It was used by the Greeks and Romans. It's got three phases: the grammar, the logic, and the rhetoric phase. And the argument is that these phases sort of naturally follow how children are already wired and how they already learn. And it sort of loosely follows their ages. So let me explain. In the grammar phase, that would loosely tie with the elementary years. And the idea is that younger kids have this innate ability to learn and to memorize. Kids always memorize things easier than adults do. And they have a natural language acquisition too, where they can learn foreign languages better. They just learn things better. Their brains are more malleable. They have more plasticity in their brains. And so the idea is in the grammar phase, we are just going to pump as much information into them as we can. We're going to get them to memorize math facts and science facts and history facts and names and dates and Bible verses, whatever we can. We're going to get into their little brains while they have that natural capacity to memorize, right? And they don't have to necessarily understand everything, but let's get it in there while we can so that we can use it later. Okay, then we go to the logic phase. And this is when kids, middle school-ish, where they start kind of pushing back. They start challenging you. Maybe they don't take everything you say at face value. They start asking why. They start asking why they need to know this, all these different things. And they say, well, if they're already going to challenge us and they're already kind of going to push, let's teach them how to ask questions. They're already asking questions. Let's teach them how to ask good questions. They're already challenging what we're giving them as if it's content, right? So let's teach them how to recognize propaganda and fallacies and all these kinds of things. So this is the logic phase, really teaching kids how to think. And then the rhetoric phase would be more tied with like high school or college. And that is where kids have had a chance to learn how to think, to ask the questions. They've developed some thinking, some thoughts on their own. They've got their own opinions. Now they need to communicate it. So now we're going to train them to be effective communicators, both in the written word and the spoken word. And so that's the trivium sequence of the classical model. Now, this model tends to be a little Western Hemisphere heavy, Greco-Roman heavy. It's sort of centered in the Western Hemisphere and is Greco-Roman heavy. They'll even learn Latin. They'll read the classics and the classic thinkers, Plato and Aristotle and that kind of thing. But I will say that, and it's just a super heavy, somewhat sort of intense learning. I will say this though, these are extremely well-educated, very articulate students. If they go through this model all the way through, in my opinion, they're going to come out with the equivalent of a bachelor's of arts in humanities. So that's crazy. Now, this approach, I should have said this before I clicked, but this approach might not be for you. If your kids have trouble memorizing or trouble reading because they use lots of those primary source documents. Okay, now let's talk about Charlotte Mason, or what's now being called the living book approach. Now, Charlotte Mason was an educator in England in the 1800s, and the classical model was what was typical in England at that time. And she basically said the opposite. She said, hey, kids are not receptacles to be dumped into. They have opinions and thoughts from the very get-go, even when they're little, and we need to nurture those. She also advocated what she called living books. It's a very literature-focused method of learning. So you're going to read a lot of books, but they're living books as opposed to what she called twaddle. So twaddle would be textbooks, very dry, just a summary. It just sort of condenses a lot of information into this very boring paragraph or page, right? Whereas a living book would be something you and I would go to the library and check out and read, whether that's a fiction, like a historical fiction, a biography, even some nonfiction books that are just more rich in content on the topic that we're studying. And so that is really an emphasis in the living book or Charlotte Mason approach. Charlotte Mason also was an advocate of spreading a feast for your kids. And so people who use this method, they want to expose their kids to the best literature, the best art, the best music. They'll take in symphonies, they'll go to art galleries or museums. They want their kids to feast on the best. Okay. There's also an emphasis on nature and on free time learning. So Charlotte Mason was like, they should be able to get their schooling done in the morning and have the afternoon to pursue other, maybe educational activities, but things that interest them, hobbies. And we also want to get kids outside and playing, using their physical bodies, engaging with nature, observing it, learning God's creation that way, all these different things. Now, Charlotte Mason may not be for you if your kids hate reading, or you could read to them, but if they have trouble listening, they're not auditory learners and their brains check out, this may not be the best option for you. Now, homeschoolers, let me pause here and say homeschoolers combine learning whenever they can. And let me give you, for example, it doesn't necessarily matter when I learn about the life cycle of frogs or the Civil War, as long as I learn about it, right? That's the argument. And so both of these styles of learning, classical and Charlotte Mason, sometimes we'll incorporate something called morning basket time. And that's where the family will all learn together for some of our subjects or some of our reading, right? And you could probably Google morning basket time. We don't have time to really get into it, but just know that you can combine learning sometimes for homeschoolers. Now, both of these styles, these traditional styles would be, or they're not traditional, but these favorite, they're long-standing homeschool favorites, might be good for your family if you love books and literature, if you really value traditional higher education, like a college education, that kind of thing. These might be good for you. All right, let's talk about more homeschooling favorites that have been around for a while. Unit studies, this has been around from almost the very beginning. And this is where families learn all together for most of the subjects. And almost all of those subjects, all or most of them, are connected to a springboard theme. Okay, so for example, maybe our springboard theme is France. So definitely there's going to be the opportunity to study geography and culture. We're going to get out the map. We're going to maybe eat French food, listen to French music, whatever. In history, we may study the French Revolution. As we read a biography, we're going to read about Napoleon. But we might also be able to include our science and our math in this springboard activity. So for example, with science, maybe we're going to study simple machines because the guillotine used simple machines. Okay, so that's just an example. And the idea here is that schools will often teach all the subjects in sort of a disjointed, disconnected manner. But if we can study them all together in sort of this interwoven, connected way, now we're seeing connections and we see how this affects this and this, in turn comes into play here. And so that we get a greater understanding in all the different areas, as well as greater retention. And it's more fun. Usually most people say it's more fun. I already said the family learns together for most of it. Now, you may alter the expectations of some assignments that you might give your kids. The olders might have to do more or whatever, but everyone can learn together and then produce content at their level. And then sometimes you might have to be a little more concentrated in language arts and math, which is a little more sequential, right? But this approach often includes something called lap booking. I don't really have time to go into that right now, but you'll definitely want to look that up online because it's pretty interesting and pretty cool. Now, unit studies may not be for you if you don't have a lot of time, because in my opinion, this approach is a little more labor intensive for the parent, especially if you are creating the unit itself and not using somebody else's pre-done unit. Just kind of getting all those connections and collecting all the materials to do this very hands-on integrated learning can be time consuming. It might also not work for you if you have a wide discrepancy in ages, where what's interesting the littles is just boring the olders, or what's, speaking to the olders is kind of losing the littles. Let's also talk about unschooling and delight directed. I also mentioned this briefly before, but and it's interesting because it used to be called unschooling and now it's being called delight directed learning. And the reason is that advocates say, well, we're not learning, right? We're teaching our kids. We're just doing it in a different way. We're capitalizing on their natural curiosities to school them. So perhaps even more than most of the other homeschool options, they really see all of life as learning. So, you know what? I lost my train of thought. Let me look at my notes. Okay. They're going to delve into topics as the child becomes interested. And so they don't necessarily teach things in a traditional order. Let me give you for example. Students in early elementary are often learning about money, right? But in a unschooling family or a delight directed family, your child might not be interested in money. So you don't really talk about it until they have an interest in it. And they might not gain an interest in it until they want to start their own lawn mowing business. And now they've got to deal with money. Or even a lemonade stand, right? And so now that the interest is there, the need is there, now we teach that topic. And so that's sort of what delight directed learning is all about. They will spend as little or as long as that interest holds. And they would say, hey, we do this as adults, right? Sometimes I have a question and I Google it and, oh, okay, I got my answer. That's that. Sometimes I might be like, oh, that's interesting. And I'll spend a little more time learning. Maybe I'll get a couple books from the library and read up, or watch some webinars or YouTube videos or whatever. Sometimes that leads us to a hobby and we pursue that for several years. Sometimes it leads to a lifelong passion and we become an expert in this area and maybe even become a teacher to other people in this area. So they would say, this is just this mimics real life. It's hard sometimes to wrap our minds around what this looks like, but if you can think about Montessori or Waldorf, which is something many of us are familiar with, you get a better understanding of what this unschooling schooling looks like. Okay. Now, these two options here are really good for families who want a looser structure, or who want more freedom in their homeschooling, or want something other, right? They homeschooled because they didn't want school with books and just school the way school looks, right? They wanted something different. It might also be really good if you've got very active learners, either of these, or if you've got right brain learners who are learning in more non-traditional ways. There are some other options. I'm going to go through these quickly. One is traditional, and this often feels safer and more familiar for new people or even seasoned homeschoolers. And that's because it recreates school at home. So it might be what we've been used to, right? It's using textbooks and workbooks or the online equivalent. It's very age grade sequenced, your typical ages, your typical grades. It might not be good for you if your students need something different. Maybe that's why you left school. Well, don't recreate it at home. They needed something different. or if you have multiple kids, and here is why. If you do traditional, right? Everyone's going to be learning probably about 5 subjects, right? And so now if I multiply that by 3 or 4 or 5, you now see that as a parent, I am keeping track of and grading, 15 different 15 different subjects or 25 different subjects. It just can become overwhelming very quickly. It might not be good if there is it might be good if there's a big discrepancy in the ages where learning together is just too difficult and everyone just needs their own. Or it's good if maybe you're not confident and you want something that's familiar. You need that security as you start getting started homeschooling. Or maybe you just want to homeschool temporarily and then you want to send your kids back to school. And so you want to follow the sequence that they would have been doing so that they can easily segue back. There are other options here online that might be good if you have to work. It's bad because sometimes kids can get distracted on the computer. They can waste time, playing a game instead of doing school or whatever. And it also decreases your touch points with them, but it can be very helpful in times of need if you're working or you've got health issues or whatever. Eclectic, this is where you sort of piece things together. Well, I want traditional for math, but I want living book for history, and I want unit study for science or whatever. So there you're piecing it together. This can be cheaper when you're not buying a whole packaged curriculum, or you can maybe get resources from online downloads or the library, but it takes more time to put together or it can feel haphazard. And then there are co-ops and umbrella options. And these are great for sharing the teaching load and increasing your students' interaction with other people. Or that would be like a co-op where you get together and I teach one subject and you teach another. That could be a sort of organic co-op, or there are more co-op schools where maybe the kids go 2 days a week and then they homeschool 3 or whatever. There are also umbrella schools where somebody's sort of taking care of the details for you. They pick the curriculum, or maybe you do, but they take care of all the legal things. And so the umbrella school might just be really loose, where they take care of legal things for you and keep your records for you so that you don't get into any trouble with the law. Or it might be a little more structured where everybody in the umbrella school is sort of learning on the same page. Now, we've covered a lot there. We covered 6 styles of homeschooling. Just to review, there was the classical, the Charlotte Mason Living Book, the unit study, the unschooling delight directed, the traditional, and then these other ones that we can see here. Sometimes we choose what curriculum works based off of what our child's learning style is. And so this can become an important consideration. So there are some traditional learning styles. Let's talk about those. We have the visual learners, and these are kids who need to see it in order to understand it. So they are going to it focuses heavily on reading. They're going to learn by charts and diagrams. I'll redo. I was trying to get it done before you came.